All right, welcome to another episode of Israel in Asia. Israel in Asia. Are they in Israel? Or is Israel in Asia? Yes, they are. And today we're going to be talking about the Tartars, or and among true people. These are a group of people that were in Asia, and documents are starting to show that these guys were Israelites, or they were considered Jews. So let's start from the Lost Tribe and Myth, this wonderful map that we've been using every presentation. This map was created out of the fact that they were looking for these guys, or they was trying to trace their history to identify who was who, because there was a confusion of faces. That will be in another presentation. But today our focus is Tartary and the Manchu people. As you can see, the Tartaris over here, closer to India, right above India, and close to Russia. So some of the people that was in Russia was considered Tartary, and actually this might be in part of Russia right here. And then you have the Manchu people, which ultimately went towards the east. So they migrated, and as you can see, they are migrating farther and farther away from Israel, or farther and farther away from Europe. But the thing is, most of the people that were in these lands at the time were either Japhet, Moab, or Ammon, and Tartaris. The Tartars and the Manchu people eventually came in and migrated within and infiltrated, or bottom line, assimilated with these people. So as I mentioned, they migrated to the east, and you will see later on they migrated ultimately to the south. So as the Tatars migrated from the land of Turkey over into the land of the Mongols, they took on the name of the Manchurians. And the Manchurians eventually, through multiple battles, battled their way through these lands. So now we're going to take a look at the Hermit nation in this book. First, on the first page at the top, it says, "It will be remembered that the first Chinese settlers and civilizers of Korea, the Khatais, gave it the name Chosen." Why did they give them the name Chosen? Coming from violence and war when they were in the land of Turkey and China, to a land of peace which lay east of his old home. The Tatars selected for his new dwelling place a name at once expressive of its outward position and his inward emotion, Chosen, or morning calm. So these people, the Manchurians, selected the name Chosen as the chosen land, or the land of morning calm, because they felt that they were in the promised land, because finally they had a moment of peace after all the battles that they went through over in China and Turkey. Now, let's go down to the bottom. It says, one day, while in the woods, his favorite bird, in pursuing it, a Mikito and his family, with tributary nobles and feudal chiefs holding their land on military tenure. This is the ancient classic land in the rim of Yamato. Four other provinces adjoining it have always formed the core of the empire, and are called the Go-Kina, or five home province, suggesting the five clans of Kokuri. To the northeast stretch the little known or less civilized region, peopled by tribes of kindred blood and speech, who spoke nearly the same language as the Yamato tribe, and who had probably come at some past time from the same ancestry seats of the Manchurians, and called the Kunto, or the region east of the barrier of Osaka. See that? Osaka. And if somebody remember, and if it's in another discussion, Osaka The Scythians were called Saka. The Scythians was called Saka. So, nations migrations. So that there's no confusion. We want to make sure that everyone understand. I'm not saying Koreans are Israel, and I'm not saying all Japanese are Israel. I'm saying that the northern tribe migrated into Asia under the name the Tartars and the Manchu people, or now called the Kaiser or called the Chosen, whatever proverb or byword they were given, they migrated into these nations and began to look like them. But their activities and their principles started to show within those regions and develop those regions, in fact. So let's talk about nations. So all nations, you had the seed of, you had Noah. Noah had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So a lot of times people think, oh, well, Ham is all Africa. Believe it or not, Ham actually migrated over into Asia as well. But most of the seed that migrated over this was Japheth, and as well other Shemitic seeds. The Shemitic seeds are Israel, Edomites, Moab, Ammon, Ishmaelites, and Moabites. I already said Moabites. So a lot of these people are from the seed of Shem. They just weren't exactly Israel. Please read your Bible, do your homework. On this other side, you will see that you have the other nations, the 18 nation chart. I did not develop this, so if this chart is totally absolutely wrong, I apologize, but I think this is on point. So please realize that a lot of people that didn't know this, Spain and Tasha and the Greece, the first seed of Greece and those that ran Greece were from the seed of Japheth. They were not Shemitic, they were from Japheth. And who controlled the European until Esau from the seed of from Shem displaced them into the islands like the Philippines, Korea, and China. Korea and Japan. So before Spain, there was already a slave market in the Philippines and a ruling class, which was probably either Hamitic, Shemitic, or Japhet. So there were multiple people in these lands. So please realize there's a mixed multitude out there, but then the goal is to find out, so where did Israel go? The reason why this material exists is because that's what they were doing, looking for who was the seed of Israel. In fact, this book, Lost Tribe and Myth, is a testimony of people looking for who? They were looking for Israel. So when they was looking for Israel, they confirmed Moab and Edom and Ammon, right? And it says this situation forced actions by Nebuchadnezzar. 5 years after the captivity of Jerusalem, basically, then he swept the land of the Ammonites and the Moabites. It will be recognized that Joash destroyed the ancient Ammonites and Moabite sanctuaries had only encouraged those Armenians kindred of Israel, and they're exclusive from all from all possible membership in Yahoo congregation, had brought all their power of political compulsion into action. They regarded such a measure as Chinese or Japanese government regarding American acts of exclusions of their people from American citizenship. So they confirmed that Moab and Ammon were in fact the Chinese and Japanese people. So by all means, understand when I'm talking about the region of China and Japan and Korea, I also know that Ammon and Moab populated majority of those lands to this day, but there were a remnant of Israel. In fact, if we study here, the Library of Political Secrets, 5th column, Israel. Now, if you study the word 5th column, It basically is a group of people who undermine a larger group within. So basically, they're assimilated. Their confusion of faces look like them, but they undermine the population because they have God on their side. They have the commandments. They have the Bible. They have rituals. They have knowledge and wisdom that God has provided them. But the thing is, people didn't like that about them because they ultimately took over and implemented their ways of God. As it says in Esther 12:4, declare unto us that in all nations throughout the world there was scattered a certain malicious people. Why were we malicious? Because we followed our God, that had laws contrary to all other nations, and continually despised the commandments of kings, the commandments of men or their people, so as to unite our kingdom, which is the other kingdoms, honorably intended by us, cannot go forward. So basically, why did the Jews get persecuted? Because they wanted to force their agenda, but God, every time he sent his seed to other nations, they tried their best to continue to keep the commandments that was contrary to their laws. However, let's read Japan. If these secret Jews, now these are the real Jews, are rooted out of and stripped of their power from Japan and China, which we're saying the Manchu people, follow a policy in favor of their race, because they knew they had their Jewish race or the Israelite race and nation, and reject the pressure from Israel and American Jews. How is it? Oh, I thought we were talking about. Oh, no. These were the converted Jews that infiltrated them. So basically, you had one Jew that was migrated and persecuted, and you had another new Jew that was persecuting them, trying to get them to believe in their doctrine and replace them. It says, do not trust your enemies lest they replace you. That's in the Apocrypha. It says the whole world of Asia could eventually follow their example and free themselves and other countries from their Jewish domination. You should just read it. If you don't get it, it's contradiction there. It means you don't got the spirit on you. That's all it is. Now let's read China. Later, mixed marriages have increased in the number of fifth columns Israel, whose racial appearance is Chinese. Oh, but all Jews, all Israel is black, right? They dark, Hispanic, Native American. Oh, okay. Let's read that again. Later, mixed marriages have increased the numbers of fifth columns Israel, whose racial appearance is Chinese, but who in secret are members of the nation of Israel, increasing in the way of clandestine, that means secretly, Israelites. Although we believe that the Chinese population resulting from these mixed marriages may still be small, they say, so it's not that many, but small, it would be important to investigate to calculate the number of Jews in China. So you have the Jews in China. There will be a confusion of faces. If you go to Isaiah and Daniel, it will say that they will dwell also in Moab as well, which is what? Chinese. It says they will dwell in Moab, which is China. That's, I guess, Isaiah. So I don't have my Bible open. Let me open it up real quick. Come on, give it to me. There we go. I'll put it down. So yeah, Isaiah 16. Isaiah 16:4. It says, let my outcasts dwell with thee, Moab. Let my outcasts, those that migrated and persecuted, let my outcasts dwell with thee, Moab. But thou, a convert to them from the face of the spoiler, for the extermination is at an end, the spoiler ceases, and the oppressor are consumed out of the land, and the oppressor are consumed out of the land. So it says basically the outcasts will dwell with Moab. Some of them will. Just saying. All right. So now we're not going to touch on India because that's just on this slide. But please realize that there are other most of these people migrated over from India first, and then into Asia. So that's another fact that happened throughout time, and you will see that in another presentation. So Israel migration. Speaking of India, let's talk about that. So in this book called the Lost Tribe of Myth, they talk about the tribe of Asher and Manasseh. So these kind of giving some clarity on who they are, but there were actually more than just Manasseh, and Ephraim and Manasseh were the lead of the northern tribe. So that's why they call them the tribe of Manasseh. That's all. All right. So now one thing we realize too here is that it says one of the cardinals quoted another form of Afghan traditions. The Jews, or the tribe of Asher, were founded the Afghans, and they moved thence down to India. Hence, the Jews in India today, from the mouth of Indus down west coast, while Manasseh settled in the borders of China and Tartary. There we go. That's that Tartary. And 5 centuries later, they spread all through Asia. What are we talking about right now? We're talking about Japan and Korea right now. That's, we're going to see where they happen, because are they in Japan and Korea right now? I don't think so, but it could be. But they definitely took on Asian characteristics. So let's just make sure we stay there. And then, of course, over here, Judaism on the right, Judaism certainly reached Japan. So they saying the Judaism, the religion, the people. So basically, there was some type of influence that made it its way to Japan from a remnant of people that was Israel. Now, here's another book that I found fascinating. Please go read this book. If you have Stockholm syndrome, for somebody that might be watching this video, if you got Stockholm, read this book. It will wake you up. It will kick you in your balls, because it's so frank and blunt. They do not hold anything back. In fact, if you just read this page alone, that's one first paragraph right here where it says, one or the other of them, I believe, produced a real chestnut. So they basically a gem here. He's saying, oh, we got a gem here. The title of the Japanese emperor Makido is Hebrew for me God, and therefore means that he is a descendant of the lost tribe of Gad. And I'm like, wow, I never heard that before. Now, I'm still researching that because I got to find another resource to make sure that's legit. When I do the translation, Google Translate, it does come out when you do a translate. You translate from English to Japanese, something like that, it comes out. However, he said this, but then if you read the other paragraph, he's actually saying we wish we could have hired a con artist to kind of not state this fact and make it up to something. And then he says, ain't philosophy wonderful? So he's pretty much saying we should have philosophized and said it meant something else. Now, this is the only book I have it. So right now, he's actually saying we found this fact, but we should hide it and make it to mean something else. Just read this book. Now, on the next page, it says we can't even grasp how many Jews who looked like Japanese. There we go again. So these guys look like Ammon, I guess. They saying these guys look just like Ammon and perished in several massacres. So they were still killed and persecuted of Christians. So they were persecuted as Christians, but they were actually persecuted as Jews. Nor yet how many Morenos, what is a Moreno? Moreno is a converted Jew. There were among the Japanese who are said to have secretly continued practicing their forbidding cult after it had been officially suppressed, meaning they couldn't do it anymore. They was doing it in secret. So ultimately, just realize there were people that just happened to look like Chinese. Like this, basically, they had a Mongoloid feature. That's the goal. The understanding that Ammon and Moab looked Mongoloid. They migrated into India, started assimilating with the Elam people, and then over time they migrated to Asia, started assimilating and marrying and mixed racing with the Moabites and Ammonites, and started taking on some of their features looking like Japanese and Chinese people, but they were Israel. So what happened to those people? Let's see. Well, here we have this book, The History of Japan. Now, I found this book very fascinating when I found it. It's a cool book, but you will see that over time, one of the samurais that was called Tentuns, Samurai Tentuns, ultimately came from Tartary and basically overthrew the Asian, overthrew first Korea as well as Japan, because the samurais ultimately landed and stayed within Japan. Now this is back this is from the BC time when they fled out of the Babylon persecution over into Asia and continued and stayed and found their homes in Korea. These same people, say it's the 660 BC at the very bottom of the page, that's when he came over into Asia. So his ancestors and his relatives and his seed continue to sustain power and become the samurais of Japan. So these people were the samurais of Japan. However, they talk mostly about Korea because they migrated from Korea into Japan. And the people that were the Moabites and the Ammonites knew these people. And as I mentioned before, they called them the chosen people. They knew they had power. They had temples for them. So they had temples and sacred stones, and they made these people their leaders and their warriors. So because of this history and this power, the Koreans actually, the Japanese actually used this legend and this history against the Koreans, because when they created the samurai temples in Japan, they had their artifacts and their stones. So if you read that, the Koreans said that the reason why they were submitting to the Chinese is because they knew that they had the stones, and then they did not want to fight against heaven. They knew the Koreans respected these people, the chosen, the Israel of Asia, so much that they did not want to fight with them if they had certain stones from these people. It says, and the Koreans feared the power of the Jews, but they really didn't fear the Chinese exactly, or Moabites, because they weren't Jews, but they knew they had their artifacts. And it says, in addition, eventually the Jewish people fell, so that legacy started to wear off. As time go, you fell into the Spanish acquisitions, and over time, the prophecies had to be fulfilled, and that's what started to happen. And that's the avaricious of Korea were said to be of the same race as the Chinese. So I'm still learning this, but the Chinese and the Koreans are considered ultimately the same race, which we said earlier, that is Moab. The Chinese and Koreans are considered the same race, Moab. Ham was in the south of Japan. Japhet was definitely there. That was in the north of Japan, and they are intermingled with each other. But there was a seed of Israel that also mingled, a race of Israel that mingled throughout all of Korea and China. In fact, I mentioned them before. Their names, they called this race the Kaishi race, were the Semitic or the Jewish race. So those that were of Kaishi race within Korea and Japan were considered the Jews in the Semitic race, and also considered the chosen people. In Korea, they were called the chosen people, and in Japan, they were usually the samurais. They were usually the samurais and some of the first emperors. Over time, they got overthrown, and they became suppressed by the people of Korea and Japan. And they overcome by the emperors and those that lived in the land. Feel free to get this book. You can actually download it, but I'm just giving you abbreviated understanding from what I've read already, and just have these pages that you can cover yourself. So this is another book. Korea. Korea was actually spelled with a C. The Hermit Nation. As I just mentioned a second ago, in Korea they were called the Chosen. The Chosen. You see right here, it says at the time of suppression of Chosen and incorporation of the territory with Chinese emperor in BC 100 BC, this region was called the Chosen. But it basically became they started becoming oppressed, and they started to push the name away from them. It says this little country included 54 tribes or clans, each one independent of the other and living under a sort of government. The larger tribes are said to have been composed of 10,000 and the smaller of 1,000 families each. Round numbers, however, in the ancient records are worthy little of critical purposes. It says south of the Mahan was the Benhan, in which were 12 tribes. Now this is using 12 tribes here now, so it's like, okay, it's just Israel? No, not exactly. Having the same matter and customs as the Manhan, and speaking a different yet kindred dialect. One of these clans formed a little kingdom of Ammonin, from which came first visit of Korea's record in the Japanese annals. It says after the overthrow of his family and kingdom by the traitor, the king of old Chosen escaped to the sea and fled southward to the Empinago, southward. So he goes south and say, I'm fleeing. So he evaded, like, I'm getting out of here. So this is the king of the old Chosen, meaning Israel. That's what Israel was called, the Chosen, fled Korea because of now the betrayal and the fighting within Korea. And basically, when he fled and he had with him a number of faithful people, his wife and his children. He landed among one other clan, the Manhan, composed of Chinese refugees. So now these are refugees as well, who not wishing to live under the Han Empire, had crossed the Yellow Sea. So basically, everyone is now escaping and evading oppression and moving south. So the first evasion, they left from Israel into Asia and kept going over to the south, farther and farther. I mean, to the east, farther and farther, and then eventually they started going south. So they started going east, and then they went south. I was gonna say this. They started going east over to Korea and Japan, and started going south. So let's go reiterate on this, then make sure that we understand that this is talking about the Chosen again. All right, so the name conferred by Kaishi, which is the nickname they gave. Also, that was another name for the Israelites that were in Korea. Kaishi, the civilizers. They were called Kaishi because they civilized. They was knowledgeable as well. Upon the new domain is that now in the use of modern Korea, Chosen or morning calm. That's what I said earlier. The land was called the Chosen or the morning calm. The ancient kingdom of Chosen. So this is the king. We saw the king that fled. According to the Koreans, comprised of the modern Chinese. So they were kind of considered modern Chinese, which is now about the size of Ohio, having an area of 45 square miles and a population of 8 million souls. It is entirely outside and west of the limit modern Korea. So basically, they're talking about those that migrated from Tartary and the Manchu people that migrated over and over from to the east, and then went down into Korea, and they were called the chosen people. So these were nomads that migrated into the land of Korea. And also, as we mentioned earlier, some of those people also went into Japan and became the samurais and the people of Japan. So now that we then went over that, is there a remnant in Korea, in Japan? I don't know. They could be, but not sure. But one thing I do know from other slides, if you go look at the Macau slave trade, those that were in China and Macau, as you can see on this map, they all were sold into slavery. And where did they get sold to? Southeast Asia. And these people that I'm talking about now, the chosen people, the samurais, they eventually fell and got overran by either somebody that was from the Moabite seed, the Ammonite seed, and got turned over and given into their oppression. They fled from there as well. So now if you look up and look at Japan and China, they flee where? First they already fled over to the east, but then they fled to the south. The Pentagon. The Pentagon is these islands below. They fled into Southeast Asia. They either evaded and fled in Southeast Asia, or they were already they stayed in those lands and got traded into Southeast Asia. Believe it or not, even once they got to Southeast Asia, some of them still got traded and sold there, which is depicted in this trade, in this unfree migration flow, meaning these people were traded in between lands into other countries. Some were sent back to Africa, or some was even sent to India. But was there a remnant of Israel in Japan and Korea back in the day? Absolutely. Is there still a little bit of remnant there now? I don't know. Where did these people go? Did they get sold into slavery? Over time, yes, they did. Where did they get sold to? Southeast Asia somewhere. Is there a remnant there? I guess so. At the same time, do they look Asian and Mongoloid? Absolutely. They said they looked like Chinese and Japanese back in the day. So what changes it now? So by all means, realize there is a remnant of Israel in Asia. If their spirit bear witness, tell them to keep the commandments, share the word, and pray that you don't offend one of these little ones. Till next time, peace and blessings, and I'm glad I was able to share. Thank you.